So this video is about the ugly history of the Pledge of Allegiance and why it does matter. So this is in a section in the Washington Post. It was written by Christopher Petrelia. And there is a history of the Pledge of Allegiance that people are not really paying attention to. A lot of people have tried to put videos out. There have been a few people who have researched it and they've tried to put videos out, but they were unsuccessful in doing so. And so now you have it to where people have tried to I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back and see if I can recapture all of the things that I had, because I have to go back and review it. So anyway, I'm going to pull it up here. So I'm trying to move it over right as we speak. So a lot of people don't really pay much attention to this fact that there's a history with this Pledge of Allegiance. And so this article, of course, was back in 2017 of November the 3rd, but it goes on to read that at the time, last month, school officials at the Windfern High in Houston expelled a 17-year-old senior, India Landry, for refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in protest of police brutality and Donald Trump being president. So despite her expulsion, most legal scholars agree that refusing to stand for the pledge is protected by the Constitution. The Supreme Court has held, in fact, that the government can neither require a student to participate in the pledge nor compel them to engage in what amounts to implicit expression by standing at respectful attention while the flag salute is being administered. So while defending pledge protests on free speech grounds is useful and necessary, it often draws attention away from the pledge's political origins in nativism and white nationalism, the roots that help us better understand a broader struggle for racial justice and full citizenship that drives these protests. So a lot of people don't really know the origins of all of this. They just go along with whatever somebody puts out there. And it's sad because we don't have enough people that have really, and it doesn't take that long to research this, people. It's just the fact that people won't do it, or they just kind of like fall in line with everybody else and they're okay with this, which you shouldn't really be. And so the origins of the pledge trace to the late 19th century, the product of an expansionist American project. So in 1891, the Family Magazine Youth Companion asked 35-year-old Francis Bellamy, a former pastor of Boston's Bethany Baptist Church, to fashion a patriotic program for schools around the country to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival to America by raising the U.S. flag over every public school from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, there's some schools who now, after really doing their homework, will not acknowledge Christopher Columbus anymore, how it started off. There was a big controversy behind that because people researched Christopher Columbus and found out that he too was an enslaver and that he too participated during the times of transporting slaves on boats. So, and worse than that, also a rapist. So, in just 23 lean words, Bellamy attempted to capture the underlying spirit of the American Republic. In so doing, he wrote his way into the history books. So I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's really look into that. So while the language contained the pledge is not overtly nativist or xenophobic, the spirit that animated its creation was steeped in this sort of bigotry. So, through the pledge, Bellamy sought to define the true Americanism against the rising tide of Southern and Eastern Europe immigrants pouring over our country in the early 20th century from races which we cannot assimilate without a lowering of our racial standards. Okay, although Bellamy conceded that the US, or United States as they call, has always been a nation of immigrants, he argued that incoming waves of immigrants are coming from countries whose institutions are entirely at variance with our own. So, all of you people who having these protests, all of you, the Hispanic culture, all of the people from different countries in Africa, and all these other people coming from these places, don't be surprised why they're talking about a wall, why they're slow dragging on making decisions about what they're going to do with the DACA issue. That is not a surprise, not at all. People who have really studied and know this country and know the history of this country know that none of these things should be of surprise to anyone. But some people assume that this is supposed to be the land of the free. Well, there's a lot of things that have been going on all throughout history that you newcomers, or you people that haven't been here very long or don't know the full background of American culture and patriotism, where it really originates, you're learning when you look at when they want to make a wall, when they want to push people out, or when they bring a new group in, the language that has been used in the campaigns. Well, they're not bringing their finest. Who did we hear that from? So, going on with this article, decrying the character and quality of these recent newcomers, Bellamy lamented that we cannot be a dumping ground of Europe and bloom like a flower garden. To him, every dull-witted and fanatical immigrant granted citizenship threatened the American Republic. And so you who think you're white, that was trickery. The ones who maybe you got a percentage of white in you, but you got something else. You, to them, to these people who are bigoted and racist, do not consider you to be a part of their culture that is deeply rooted in bigotry and racism. So far from a political outlier, Bellamy tapped into the ubiquitous turn of the century nativism that made enemies of the 2.5 million Slavs, Jews, and Italians who immigrated to the U.S. throughout the 1880s and the 1990s. The 1890s. Nativists have approved of mostly white immigrants who came from Northern and Western Europe in the 1860s to the 1870s, seeing them as skilled and industrious, just like native-born Americans. So they pick and choose who they want or who they feel should be over here in America and who will assimilate. If you don't assimilate, you're trying to hang on to your cultures from wherever you come from, you're militant about your flag, like we've so often seen people raising their flag, it's a threat to the American culture. But they recoil at the darker immigrants from they recoil, meaning they recoil at the darker immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe who were less likely to speak English and more likely to be Catholic or Jewish. And what do we got going on right now, people? You figure it out. So such immigrants were considered not fully white and thus virtually assimilable. You won't assimilate. You're too rooted in your culture, not the Americanized culture. So all of you Hispanics who are being mean to Black people, they consider you probably even less because they look at you as though you don't assimilate. You don't assimilate, and then you've been raising your flag and you've been fighting for your culture, not the Americanized culture. You don't want to assimilate. That's the way somebody in the background who's wrote all of this has thinking. They've done it to other cultures. They've done it to other people. You fighting against other minority groups, stop it. We've been through it. All of us have been through something. You are doing nothing but fighting for the bottom. So Bellamy's words and the context that birthed them reflected a country negotiating the contours of its own national identity and the relationship between race and citizenship and the changing nature of immigration. Bellamy, like countless others, feared that the poor stock of immigrants. Now, how we heard that language in this campaign? That this president we have now have touted very similar things that he said, and I'm not going to repeat it. You know what he said. So poor stock of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe would result in a loss of white, native-born Protestant American culture. The very culture that in their eyes had built the American Republic. This is what this stuff was built on. White Protestant Americans sought both to staunch the flow of immigrants and force those who did enter to assimilate and adopt their idealized American culture. Congress enabled the goal of exclusion by passing racially exclusionary immigration laws, including the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the Immigration Act of 1891, the Gerry Act of 1892. This is why I'm telling you it's so important for people to look at how politics are, whether you like it or not. It includes all of us and how things will be shaped in this country and how they treat you, the language that they're saying, what they've been doing to people in this country. This is nothing new. So Bellamy's pledge advanced the goal of assimilation. That's what this whole thing has been rooted in. So written to, in his words, mobilize the masses to support primary American doctrines by warding off internal enemies hostile to true Americanism. So all of this stuff, what they're doing to the NFL players, they don't want them to kneel. They don't want them to go hide in their locker rooms when the pledge is being said. That is their constitutional right. But what they've been doing is trying to take that right of them away. They feel that that's not their right. That's white people's rights, not Black folks' rights, not Mexican rights, not whatever other culture is over here rights, and not Hispanic rights, white people's rights. So you guys got to learn what is really going on. Nobody's saying nothing about this. I'm saying something about it because this is what's really happening. There's a lot of lies and a lot of stuff you have to see through these coded languages that they've been giving us. So the creation and proliferation of the pledge in part served as a way to consolidate white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American WASP culture. WASP culture. Let me say it again. WASP culture. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant American culture values that the white mainstream perceived as under siege. It's a threat. When you come over here raising your Mexican flag, raising your African flags, raising your talking about your language and all this kind of stuff, they view that as a threat. That is a threat on their culture. So you is impeding on their culture. And if you refuse to assimilate, then this is what's going to happen. So although the pledge did not become the mandatory part of the school day until 1930s, its establishment in the 1890s exemplified the ways in which the culture works in moments of moral panic to secure both literally and figuratively the nation's territorial and ideological borders. Are you hearing this? And for those of you that don't want to wake up, you need to. You're still in the sleeping zone, what they call you in the sunken place. It ain't just some blacks in the sunken place. It's some Mexicans in the sunken place. It's some Africans that come over here. They sunk in the sunken place too, and they not looking at this. That is the reason why they're making these laws. They're trying to stop NFL players from kneeling. They're trying to basically take away what's supposed to be a right of everyone. It's not your right. That's the way they look at it. So in a similar way, in 1954, addition to the words under God to the pledge constituted a salvo against another outside menace, godless communism. That's what it means. There are hidden coded messages and agendas in all of this. Wake up, people. So the nativism of the 1890s that birthed the Pledge of Allegiance is still with us today. It has not left. So at a time when the President of the United States demanded restrictive immigration laws in the wake of terrorist attacks and the promise to build a great wall between the United States and Mexico to curb the flow of Mexican migrants whom he has categorized, branded as criminals and rapists, we would do well to learn from our history of race-based moral panics and compulsory patriotism. Given that the history, we should not be surprised. Exactly, just what I've been saying. There shouldn't be no surprise about all of this. We should not be surprised that our current national concern over borders and citizenship have prompted fierce debates about race and patriotism. Now, I'm going to be candid and honest. I'm going to kind of tell you that I have dealt with some people that I've lived close to who are, I know that they're Mexican. They have said things against Black people, like we are their enemy. They're not reading. Apparently, even the older ones aren't reading about the history. They don't know. You're fighting the wrong people. The ones who you need to be concerned about are the ones that are in suits and in ties, and they're making laws that could put you permanently out of here. And they've been doing that. And I've been saying this. And they not only going against people like that are Hispanic, they're going against Blacks, they're going against anybody that they feel is going to be a threat to this WASP culture. If you look at my previous videos, there are people who are a part of basically part of KKK beliefs who are trying to run for office and political seat. A couple of them have gotten in there. They don't like you either. Unbeknownst to those who think because they got white light skin and they look like they're white, that's not assimilation, sweetheart. You are not white compared to what these people's ideology are. Get that mess out of your head, that Blanca and all this kind of stuff. Let me tell you something. These people do not like you either. They are showing you this. It's all in the paper and all in the news. So get this all this stuff in your head. Well, we can claim white status. Let me tell you something. That is just to get you over here so you can work your tail off and snap your back. And when they're done with you, they move you out of the way and move the next group in. I'm just being real with you. So in response to the former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick protests of police violence against Black and brown people, the president quipped, when you go down and take a knee, you're sitting essentially for our national anthem and you're disrespecting our flag. See, they find everything a threat, even if it's silent protest. Even if you're not really, it isn't disrespectful, but they view it as you sitting and you're disrespecting the country. That's the way they look at it. So in one of his 37 tweets last month, during that time, on the subject, Trump added that the only way out of the NFL is to set a rule that you can't kneel during our national anthem. So this is basically going against people's constitution. He's saying y'all don't have no rights. Compulsory patriotism of this variety and the sort of forces students to stand for the pledge should remind us that questions of race and belonging are always linked to notions of nationality and nationalism, rather than solely reflecting imagined American values. Bellamy's Pledge of Allegiance, at its core designed as an instrument of white nationalism deployed to combat the dangerous outsiders of his day. And that's what's happening this day. It's revisited. It's revamped. Rather than the solely reflecting imagined American values, Bellamy's Pledge of Allegiance was at its core designed as an instrument of white nationalism deployed to combat the dangerous outsiders of his day. Does that ring a bell? Hispanic people, do that ring a bell? Black people who wonder why they are doing all this stuff to the NFL, do that ring a bell? The roots of the pledge shed light on the continued necessity of protest today that powerfully are linked to the history of race and violence with non-negotiable citizenship and full belonging. You need to really understand, people, that all of what has happened in the past, we are actually going through it all over again. Take a look at some of the things that are going on so you can see that it's not anything new. Okay, what are the words of the Star-Spangled Banner? Star-Spangled bigotry, the hidden racist history of the national anthem. People don't even know that. Okay, the national anthem is rooted in nothing but bigotry. Okay, Americans generally get a failing grade when it comes to knowing our patriotic songs. I know more people who can recite American F, you know what, yeah, America F, yeah, from Team America than America the Beautiful, Yankee Doodle. No one older than the fifth grader in the chorus class remembers the full song, God Bless America. More people know the Reverend Jeremiah Wright remix than the actual full lyrics of the song. Most Black folks don't even know the Black national anthem. There's a great story about Bill Clinton being at an NAACP meeting where he was the only one who knew it past the first line. Bill Clinton woke in the 90s. So in the case of our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, perhaps not knowing the full lyrics is a good thing. So it is one of the most racist pro-slavery, anti-black songs in American lexicon, and you would be wise to cut it from your 4th of July playlist. So the Star Spangled Banner, and most Americans know it, is only a couple of lines. In fact, if you look up the song on Google, only the most famous lyrics pop up on page 1. And then you see it here. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn of early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, your ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag's still there. Oh, say, or does the Star Spangled Banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? The story, as most of us are told, is the Francis Scott Key, who was a prisoner on the British ship during the War of 1812 and wrote this poem while watching the American troops battle back the invading British in Baltimore. That, as is the case with 99% of the history that is taught in public schools and regurgitated by the mainstream press, is less than half of the story. So a lot of what is taught in these schools is not all fully taught. There's only bits and pieces. So to understand that the full Star Spangled Banner story, you have to understand the author. Key was an aristocrat, a city prosecutor in Washington, D.C. He was like most enlightened men at the time, not against slavery. He wasn't against it. He just thought that since blacks were mentally inferior, now listen to this, black folks, who always want to run up and, believe what these people are telling you. And some of you don't read either. Okay, masters should treat them. Okay, so let's read this. He just thought that since blacks were mentally inferior, masters should treat them with more Christian kindness. He supported sending free blacks, not slaves, back to Africa. And with a few exceptions, it was about as pro-slavery, anti-black, and anti-abolitionist as you could get at the time. Of particular note, as Key's opposition to the idea of colonial Marines, the Marines were a platoon of runaway slaves who joined the British Royal Army in exchange for their freedom. The Marines were not only a terrifying example of what slaves would do if given a chance, but also a repudiation of the white superiority that men like Key were so invested in. So all of these ideas and concepts came together around August 24, 1815, at the Battle of Bladensburg, where Key, who was serving as a lieutenant at the time, ran into the battalion of colonial Marines. His troops were taken from the woodshed by the very black folks he disdained, and he fled back to his home in Georgetown to lick his wounds. The British troops, emboldened by their victory of Bladensburg, then marched into Washington, D.C., burning the Library of Congress, the Capitol building, and the White House. You can imagine the Key was very much in his feelings seeing black soldiers trampling on the city he so desperately loved. So a few weeks later, in September 1815, far from being a captive, Key was on the British boat begging for the release of one of his friends, a doctor named William Beanes. Key was on the boat waiting to see if the British would release his friend when he observed the bloody battle of Fort McHenry in Baltimore on September 13, 1815. America lost the battle, but managed to inflict heavy casualties on the British in the process. This inspired Key to write The Star Spangled Banner right then and there, but no one remembers that he wrote it in full third stanza decrying the former slaves who were now working for the British Army. Okay, so it reads, and where is that band who so valiantly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more? Their blood was washed out of their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the harrowing and slave from the terror of flight of the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner in triumph doeth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. So these things were put in there originally, and you don't see that. They took those out or deleted them. In other words, Key was saying that the blood of all former slaves and hirelings on the battlefield will wash away the pollution of the British invaders. So, with Key still bitter that some Black soldiers got the best of him a few weeks earlier, the Star Spangled Banner is as much a patriotic song as it is a diss track to Black people who had the audacity to fight for their freedom. Perhaps that's why it took almost 100 years for the song to become a national anthem. To hear more of the story, there is an excellent short documentary about the history of the Star Spangled Banner by some students at Morgan State University. In the meantime, it might be a good idea to switch up your 4th of July patriotic playlist. And so this is a documentary that basically goes over the Star Spangled Banner.
Is this YouTube? Mm-hmm. James, I meant Lady Bird, the movie, not Bird Lady.
Okay, let's play Lady Bird.
In August of 1914, 1 month after the first shots of World War I were fired in Europe, and less than 30 days after Babe Ruth made his Major League Baseball debut with the Boston Red Sox, Margaret Woodrow Wilson, the oldest daughter of the 28th President of the United States, took on the role as the nation's First Lady following her mother's death. Margaret, who attended Goucher College and the Peabody Institute of Music in Baltimore, yearned to be a concert singer. But her most famous performance came in 1915 when she recorded singing the Star-Spangled Banner in the White House. The song, which was written 100 years earlier by Francis Scott Key, had not yet become America's national anthem. That took another 16 years, and the efforts of Maryland Congressman John Charles Linthicum, who introduced a bill to make the Star-Spangled Banner this nation's official patriotic song 14 times before it became law in 1931. During the Star-Spangled Banner's journey from its start as a barroom song to its adoption as America's national anthem, it traveled the bumpy road forged by this nation's conflicting ideas about race and human equality. Francis Scott Key's role in this journey is rooted in a series of events that began in the early days of the War of 1812.
British troops had made their way from Benedict in the southern part of Maryland. They marched their way toward Washington, and on August 24th, they engaged British troops, and these are regular British troops. They engaged them at Bladensburg, just outside of Washington, D.C. And they fairly handily rout the American troops. It doesn't go well for the American troops, but to be fair, they were hastily assembled. The defenses of Washington were not very well planned, unlike here in Baltimore where they were.
In the spring of 1814, as a British fleet massed for an invasion of the Chesapeake Bay, the British commander, Admiral Alexander Cochrane, issued a proclamation that offered slaves freedom if they sought the protection of his forces.
On the British side, very interesting dynamic, because what the British realize, Admiral Cochrane, Sir Alexander Cochrane, who is in charge of the fleet, while he's here, he realizes that they can take advantage of the fact that this is an area where you have enslaved African Americans. And so in Maryland at the time, what the Royal Marines and the Royal Navy do is they encourage slaves who are in this region to join the colonial Marines.
So they put out a proclamation during the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812 saying that any enslaved people, if they came over to the British cause, would get their freedom. And that happened during the Revolution. And, this is another sort of unknown story of the War of 1812. Thousands of slaves did come over and join the British Navy and the British Army.
Other folks would see that as a betrayal of their country. But then the question that you encounter is, well, what does freedom mean for these men? And obviously for those enslaved men who decided to join the colonial Marines, well, to them, a free life in Halifax was a free life in Halifax because they weren't experiencing that in Virginia or Maryland.
He was a lieutenant in a militia unit that was sent to stop the British advance on the American capital. But the American troops were routed by a British force.
The British took a prisoner. Among the prisoners they took was a medical doctor named William Beans from Upper Marlborough.
So Key, who is acquainted with Dr. Beans, and he's a lawyer, is sent out with Colonel John Skinner, as I said, the official U.S. envoy. He negotiates prisoner releases all the time. That's what John Skinner's job is. Key accompanies him and brings letters that testify to it testifies to the fact that the Americans treated British soldiers well after the Battle of Bladensburg.
Skinner and Key found the British fleet. They were welcomed on board in Baltimore Harbor, and he convinced the British to let Dr. Beans go. However, they said, well, we'll let you go. We'll let him go, but not until we Baltimore.
And so he's aboard this truce ship, and he's behind the British command ship when they make their way toward Baltimore.
They had an armada of 19 ships in the harbor. On the night of September 13th, 14th, they did a sustained bombing, 25 hours. And
there's nothing he can do about that. He's just watching it. So there's a great deal of anxiety that builds up for him throughout that entire night.
When the firing stopped and the dawn broke, they could see a flag flying over Fort McHenry, and at first they couldn't tell what it was, and the breeze came and he saw it was the American. So he knew that we had won, and he was moved to write this poem.
It is a militaristic song. It is a song that was born out of a military struggle that took place well over 150 years ago. And it came out of that period, and it's probably fairly appropriate for the time. Whether it is appropriate for this day and age is another question to be asked.
And Sierra Bell, you do know about our initiative, right?
Yes.
Now, previously to our conversation, did you know that there were 4 stanzas to our Star Spangled Banner?
I believe so, yeah.
4 parts?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Did you know that there were 4 parts to the Star Spangled Banner?
No.
No. I don't know much about it. I didn't know that there were more stanzas, but I didn't know what the stanzas were.
In the case of the Star Spangled Banner, you don't go to the 3rd verse because the 3rd verse is a very troubling verse. The 1st verse celebrates the victory that took place at Fort McHenry in September of 1814. But the 3rd verse decries the flight of blacks from slavery to the British side to serve in the British Army during that battle that occurred early in August of 1814 when the British attacked the Battle of Bladensburg, just outside of Washington, D.C.
And where is that man who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, our home and a country should leave us no more?
Their blood has wiped out their foul footsteps of pollution.
A refuge could save their erring enslaved from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave.
And the Star Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
I feel like, well, there's obviously a reason why they left it out. Because a lot of people wouldn't be willing to say it anymore if they knew that this was a key component. I'm taking it as that the Star Spangled Banner wasn't intended for Black people. That's just reading that. That's how I'm portraying it now.
I feel like this definitely needs to be included as far as how our nation is represented. Although maybe the wording it can kind of be misconstrued in a certain way.
It's kind of contradictory to the song because if this is about freedom and then they're talking about slavery inside of it, then it just contradicts the point. I probably wouldn't sing it anymore, actually, or even I don't know. I wouldn't give it as much respect as I do now.
Yeah, that's sketchy. And I don't know why this hasn't been talked about before. I mean, I guess because people don't know about it, but this needs to be, people need to be aware of this because that's not cool.
I mean, I guess it kind of made it seem like the slaves were evil in a way, because they said that they would fight for the British. And the main thing is they're just trying to fight for their freedom.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose brush shines and bright stars through the perilous fight, for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, singers, that star-spangled banner wave, for the land of the free and the home of the brave. And there is that man who so vauntingly swore that the home and the country should leave us no more. Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hiding and slain from the terror of night, or the gloom of the grave. And the stars sang Lord banner in triumph doth wave. For the land of the free and the home of
Well, that pretty much sums it up right there. So I'm gonna leave this video, and you know, you need to really read about what is really going on, because I don't think people this Star Spangled Banner really came from. Most people don't even know all of the verses behind all of it, the whole motive behind it. And so American culture, that WASP culture, then you're going to get backlash. We've seen it in the NFL with the players, how they just even went over the heads. The people who own the teams went over the heads. I did an article about that previous. They went over the heads of people, and they didn't even know that they had changed the rules. These people will make laws, change rules. That's the reason why you got certain people trying to run for political seats, because they want to be able to change things, change laws, make things harder for people who they feel don't assimilate or don't fit in to that WASP ideology. With that being said, I'm going to leave this video. So that should give you a little bit of some inside background as to where all of this comes from. Let's not make mistakes, people. We should know where a lot of this comes from. The ugly history of the pledge comes from people, none other than to basically make lives difficult for people who don't fit in their agenda. And we know who these people are. If you don't know by now, you need to know. And listen, the way I'm talking to people, that if you don't consider yourself Black, but if you're not really white, considered white, to these people, I'm just trying to give you a bit of history and knowledge as to what is going on. Make no mistake now that we're all in the same boat, according to what these people's ideology is. Thoughts, feedback, People, you need to really do better, and you need to research where all of these things are coming from. Don't be surprised and shocked by all of this. Like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for listening.